Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the finale of the Resonant Arc Book Club. This will be the last book club episode for the foreseeable future. It is not impossible that it will return, but for now, we are setting it aside and focusing on other things. That being said, this is the last week for the Silmarillion, and I have to say, I don't know why. And I've mentioned this in other episodes, but the whole cycle of pride as the theme of this book has hit me so much more strongly than in any other previous reading of it. And I think it is especially true of the Akalabeth, which is the story of the fall of Numenor, the rise and fall of Numenor, and of the Númenóreans.
Yeah.
Super, super strongly embedded into that story. And I mean, every time I reread a book, there's usually a new thing that I find as like my favorite part for that reading or whatever. I mentioned that in the when we were back reading the first one on book club, Last Wish. You know, the first time I read it, the second short story was my favorite, and then the next time I read it, the third one was, and then the next time I read it, you know, it was so. And then this last reading of it, the final story, The Last Wish, ended up being the one that stuck with me the most on this reading. And in previous readings of the Silmarillion, you know, different chapters, but they had all been, I guess my very first reading, I was really, really fascinated with the Eilnindale, the whole, like, creation myth, the song of the Ainur and stuff. That was what hit me the first time, but on all my readings afterwards, it was like, oh, Turambar was my favorite, or Fall of Gondolin really stuck out to me this time. On this reading, the Akalabeth, the story of the rise and fall of Numenor, was by far the one that hit me the most on this reading.
Well, good, because Amazon Prime's show is probably going to be around this time
based on that. Yeah, exactly, right. So, anyways, let's go ahead and just quickly recap. It should be pretty quick to recap this week, the material for this week. So we started with of Tuor and the fall of Gondolin. This basically tells how Tuor, who is the cousin of Turin, so we have Hurin and Huor, brothers who went to Gondolin and then left. Hurin was captured, was set atop Thangorodrim, and his family was cursed by Morgoth. That was the whole story of Turin. Now, Huor's son, Tuor, this is his story. And he is essentially led by Ulmo to the old stronghold of Turgon in Nevrest that had originally been his kingdom before he removed into Gondolin and hid everybody. And he had left behind arms, so a sword and a shield and a helm, that were meant to be a sign from Ulmo, that Ulmo would send a messenger with those to bear tidings at the appointed time. And so Tuor is the one chosen by Ulmo, so he wanders into those lands, takes the arms, finds one of the messengers of Turgon who had been sent on a ship into the west. So I had mentioned last week that Turgon had been sending ships to try and, like, find the Valar and, like, you know, pray for their help or whatever. Ask for their help against Morgoth. And none of them had been successful in finding the lands of the west. So one of those mariners, I forget his name, but he was one of the only ones that actually returned, that actually saw Beleriand again. And Tuor and this guy meet up, and he leads Tuor into Gondolin, and he's bearing the arms, and so Turgon knows that this is the messenger of Ulmo, essentially. So I'm going to pull up the passage here. It says, Then Turgon pondered long the counsel of Ulmo, and there came into his mind the words that was spoken to him in Vineya. Love not too well the work of thy hands, and the devices of thy heart, and remember that the true hope for the Noldor lieth in the west, and cometh from the sea. And then the very next line, But Turgon was become proud, and Gondolin as beautiful as a memory of Elven Tyrion, and he trusted still in its secret and impregnable strength. and though even a Vala should gainsay it, and after the Neurath, another word I can't pronounce, the people of that city desired never again to mingle in the woes of elves and men without, nor to return through dread and danger into the west. So, once again, pride gets in the way of wise counsel.
Yep.
And, you know, it really makes sense. And this comes into play, I think, even more so. It's shown, I think, even more effectively in the Akalabeth. The time scale that we're working with here in the story. We just lost Kaysen. Hopefully he'll be back in a minute. There he is. He's back.
Hi.
So the time scale that we're working with here, how it's easy, I think, upon reading this to feel like, hey, we just learned about this because it was only like 100 pages ago or whatever. But we're talking about like thousands of years, hundreds of years.
The craziest thing is that Turgon is the founder of the city, and he's still there. Like so much time later, you know, he's still there as their leader.
Yeah.
And so that contributes to the pride, I think, to the I built this. Mm-hmm. Like, it's one thing to be like, oh, my ancestors, or, you know, there's a more conservative thought that maybe could tend towards this kind of thing. Like, oh, it's impregnable. It's never happened before. It'll never happen in the future. But when you're the one who did it, and you're like, you know, it's never going to happen, and it's been thousands of years, and you've been there the whole time, I think it's maybe a little easier for him to fall into that prideful way of thinking.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the time scale adds to it, and you've lived there for so long, you've become attached to it. Like you said, I built this, I made this. And anyways, pride is, it's literally the core theme that incorporates itself into every single story. It is the downfall of every character. It is always pride. And anyways, I don't know why I never really saw it, because I mean, he literally writes the word, and he had become proud, or because of the pride or whatever. He says that over and over and over and over. I just hadn't really ever seen it in previous readings.
Yeah.
Or didn't remember it, at least. Anyways, so he refuses the council, but he takes Tuor in to his own house because he knows he's the messenger of Ulmo, and he respects Ulmo. And his daughter, Idril, and Tuor fall in love and are wed. This is the second union of men and elves in this story. Since we've already talked about Maeglin in previous chapters leading up to this, and how he was in love with her, but was her cousin, so that's kind of messed up, right? He does not like this one bit. So let me get to the next part of this. Oh, I liked this line here. This I thought was really interesting. Let me pull it up. But Morgoth thought that his triumph was fulfilled, recking little of the sons of Feanor and of their oath, which had harmed him never, and turned always to his mightiest aid. And in his black thought he laughed, regretting not the loss of the Silmaril, or regretting not the one Silmaril that he had lost, for by it, as he deemed, the last shred of the people of the Eldar should vanish from Middle-earth and trouble it no more. Now, remember, he didn't have anything to do with the fall of Doriath, really. That was entirely done by Fingal's pride and the Sons of Feanor invading it all over this one Silmaril. So he's like, I lost the Silmaril, who cares? They killed each other, Doriath fell. I didn't have to do anything. Again, pride is the entire undoing of all of these people. And I just found that to be really profound, that he didn't even care that he lost it, because by so doing, by Beren and Luthien taking the Silmaril from him, which was an embarrassing thing at the first, the entire kingdom of Doriath fell. Anyways, so
wow,
Maeglin,
he's freaking lucky.
I know. So Maeglin was actually also, I think it mentions, due to pride. Maeglin was actually mining beyond the leaguer of Gondolin, so beyond the mountains. Even though the law of that land was that you couldn't leave a certain area, he was mining like way further out than he was supposed to, and that's when he gets captured by the servants of Morgoth, and he's brought in, and he makes a deal with Morgoth that he will be given Gondolin and Idril as his wife if he betrays where it lies and the ways in, which he does do. So at a time of festival, again, the city is attacked, and I think it's mentioned elsewhere. I don't think it's mentioned in the Silmarillion, but Maeglin actually sort of kidnaps or takes Idril and Erendil, their young son, and Tuor fights him atop a tower and casts him off and retreats. It says that Idril had made a secret pass, so she was sort of like worried about stuff, and she sort of made a secret route that they could escape by in case something went wrong. So they took that route. They fought Balrogs up in the mountains.
This is when Glorfindel comes back.
Glorfindel, yes. Glorfindel fights
huge.
with the Balrog. Cool. Super cool fight. Anyways, they end up escaping, and they make a settlement down south in Syria, and I'll pull up a map. Actually, I think I have the map open already. It's right here. So let me turn to that real quick. So we have Gondolin up here, right? And then we have the Kingdom of Doriath. Now remember, Elwing was the daughter of Dior, who was the son of Beren and Luthien. That's where the Silmaril is at the moment. Elwing has the Silmaril. So the people of Gondolin who escaped, they come down and they join some of the people of Doriath, Elwing in particular, down here in the mouths of Sirion, which is near the Bay of Valar and the Isle of Balar, which is where the havens are, where what's his name again?
Celeborn? No. Círdan.
Círdan the shipwright.
Yeah. Círdan the shipwright.
They're all... So essentially, if we pull back on the map again, everybody has been beaten back all the way here into this sort of bay area, at the mouths of the river that feed into it, or on the isle itself. All the people, we have like the green elves of Osiriand, they sort of hide out over here, but all of the Noldor, all of the high elves, have lost all their kingdoms in the east and the west. Maethros, he and his people have sort of like mingled with the green elves of Osiriand, so they've all been beaten back, and this is kind of like the last refuge down here near the Bay of Valar. So they've essentially completely been devastated. They're almost entirely routed at this point. Let's see. Greg Troyan says, is anybody else bugged by the Melkor Morgoth thing? A bunch of people who didn't like Melkor just stuck a nickname on him, and then he was forced to embrace it. But then again, I've started calling myself Hot Take Troyan, so what do I know? I don't think that Melkor refers to himself as Morgoth. And as we read in the Akalabeth here in a little bit, Sauron actually refers to him as Melkor still as well. So I don't think he was named Morgoth by the servants of Morgoth, but only by the elves. But I don't think he took that name on himself.
I don't think so.
Okay, so Swan Knight says, names and words have much power in Middle-earth. That's almost like magic. Melkor was cursed with the name Morgoth. Greg says, okay, that makes me feel better. All right. So anyways, that was kind of the end of that first chapter. The second chapter, let me get the title of it correct, was The Voyage of... I call him Erendil because that's easier, but I think it's Erendil. Because it's Ea. Ea as in like the name of the world. So it's Erendil. Erendil. But it's much easier to say Erendil, so I'm just going to call him Erendil. So The Voyage of Erendil and the War of Wrath. Now, it's unfortunate, I think, that we never got like a fully fleshed out description of some of the battles of the War of Wrath, because this, I said earlier that the battle that we saw was, of all the on-screen battles, so to speak, was the most epic. But the battles of this freaking war were unbelievable.
Yeah, they're off the charts. They're so epic that it's like it kind of defies everything to the point where it's like too epic.
It's so epic that's just like, anyways, didn't have time or the ability maybe to like do them justice from what he was creating in his own mind. But there are some really incredibly huge things that happen in that war. We're going to talk about a couple of them in passing, but this is all kind of just wrapping up here towards the end of the story. So Tuor and Idril come down into the south, and Elwing, the lineage of Beren Luthien, marries their son, Eärendil. So Eärendil is half Elven. His father was Tuor, mother was Idril, so he's half Elven. And Tuor kind of starts taking to the sea. So he tries going into the west and pleading for pardon from the Valar, but he is never able to find it. He actually passes out of these tales. But it does say in the text, I'll put it up here, but in the afterdays it was sung that Tuor alone of mortal men was numbered among the Eldar race, and was joined with the Noldor whom he loved, and his fate is sundered from the fate of men. Now,
whoa. So there's a whole story to be told there. We just don't know it.
Yeah, we just don't know what happened to him.
Yeah, that's crazy.
His fate was sundered from men, and he became the only living man to become counted among the Elder race, whereas Luthien had been counted among the race of men, right? She went away from the Elven fate and to the side of men. Some people might bring up, well, what about Eärendil? Because there is some confusing wording where it says he was the only living man to set foot in Valinor, but he's not actually full-blooded man. He's half Elven.
That's true, because even Elrond goes to the Grey Havens, right?
Yeah.
I mean, of course, he chose the Elven path, but still, it was essentially like a choice, right?
Right.
Like he could have chosen one way or the other. Anyway.
That's essentially what ends up happening, is that they ask Iluvatar, like, what do we do with these half Elven, half men? What is their fate going to be?
These abominations.
and essentially the answer is that they are given the choice. They can choose for themselves whichever fate they want to have. And so Eärendil, because of his wife, Elwing, chooses the firstborn fate. So I don't know. I think some people were bringing up, like, why does it say that Tuor was the only one among living men to become of the Elder race? Isn't Eärendil? But Eärendil's half Elven. We got to keep that in mind.
Right. And to be counted among the Noldor race and to set foot on the land is a different thing.
Yeah.
Like Bilbo, like Gimli, or I don't know. There are certain people that potentially made it, presumably to the land of Valinor, but that doesn't mean that they were counted among the Noldor or among the Eldar, I guess, as like sharing in their fate or something like that, right? Mm. Like my assumption would be that Bilbo still died and shared the fate eventually, right? And shared the fate of men, or of at least whatever hobbits, however hobbits fit into the whole thing.
Yeah, who knows how hobbits fit into
I would assume more like men-ish, right? And
I would think so too.
Because they're not immortal. That's what happened, and he was likely not numbered among the Eldar. I that's just me though. I don't know.
Yeah. So Eärendil sets sail into the west, looking for Valinor. He's taking up sort of like the same task as his father, trying to find that place.
Yeah.
But he leaves the Silmaril with his wife there at the mouths of Sirion. This is a mistake because the Sons of Feanor still have an oath. And they try really hard to ask for it kindly, because they're like, we don't want to freaking fight you. Can you please just give us a Silmaril? In friendship, we're coming to you. But the people of that land thought that, I guess, like the blessings that they had received were due to the fact that they had the Silmaril in their possession. So they refused to surrender it, and they definitely refused to surrender it while Eärendil was out at sea, while he wasn't there to make a choice. Yeah. So the Sons of Feanor come and attack the place for the third kinslaying. And all of the Sons of Feanor, except for two, are slain. So we have Maedhros and Maglor, the only two that are sort of good.
Right.
And they really, at this point, are freaking weary of the oath. And they really don't want to do this anymore, and everything that they do is because they feel like they're bound to it, not because they want to do it. And they repent of their oath, but they just, anyways, they're freaking sick of it, and they're sick of all the harm that it's caused. And they have a really good dialogue back and forth where they're kind of arguing between each other, like, are we actually bound to this anymore? It's really good. I'll read some of it here in a minute, but go ahead.
Yeah, it's almost like Feanor's pride was the ultimate pride, in that he didn't just bind himself, but his whole lineage to this thing. Like he was so full of himself that he, like, kind of forced this upon his posterity. Not just as his own thing that he wants to do, but that, everybody that follows him kind of has to do that. And it's like, Maedhros being subject to Feanor's pride is like kind of unfortunate, but Feanor was powerful enough to have possibly made a binding, fate for them,
They swore the oath in a moment of passion and in a moment of having lots of pride in the creation of their father. Again, downfall created through pride. Now, there's a couple things in the comments here that I want to address later. So, Vasily says, not the Silmarillion, but why did Frodo go to Valinor? I think we can get to that towards the end of the discussion today.
Oh, yeah.
And then Swan Knight says, also, Celebrimbor, the last ruler of the House of Feanor, helped Sauron craft the Rings of Power. Correct?
Yeah, but not knowing that Sauron would use them for evil. That's a very important note there.
This also comes into this week's reading, which we'll get into here in a little bit once we get into more the Rings of Power in the Third Age, which was the last section of the book.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyways, what happens though is that the sons of Eärendil, Elros and Elrond, are actually captured by Maedhros. And remember the difference between the way that the other sons of Feanor dealt with Dior's sons, the brothers of Elwing. They left them to starve in the woods as young kids by themselves. It was a horrible thing that Maedhros was very upset about. But Maedhros instead takes Elrond and Elros into his own house and sort of fosters them after this kinslaying, right? They do not capture the Silmaril. Elwing throws herself into the ocean with the Silmaril, but almost like, nah, I'm not having that. And he pushes her back on the land again. So she tries to kill herself, but he doesn't let it happen. And then Eärendil returns and reunites with Elwing and says, all right, there's nothing left for us. And I noticed that there's a big difference, right? Eärendil's sons had been captured by Maedhros. And he instead of trying to get revenge, he was like, the only answer here is to put aside sacrifice, and we have to go into the West. We have to take the Silmaril into the West and plead for the help of the Valar. So his lack of pride, his lack of what any other major elf lord we've come across so far in this book would have done is seek revenge for his sons. He leaves and goes into the West and puts the needs of the many over the needs of himself or what he wants. So I found that interesting. Yeah. But it's because he has the Silmaril on this voyage that he's actually able to find the lands in the West. Or at least it hints at that in the text. See if I can find where it says that. Yeah, so it's right here. It says, and the wise have said that it was by reason of the power of that holy jewel that they came in time to the waters that no vessels save those of the Teleri had known. And they came to the enchanted isles and escaped their enchantment. And they came into the shadowy seas and cast their shadows, and they looked upon Tol Eressë, the lonely isle, but tarried not. And at the last they cast anchor in the bay of Eldamar, and the Teleri saw the coming of that ship out of the east, and they were amazed, gazing from afar upon the light of the Silmaril, and it was very great. So, again,
I wonder if Tor was there.
Doesn't say, but it would have been cool.
That would be cool.
Again, the common theme here is that things tend to happen at times of festival. And Eärendil comes into Valinor at a time of festival, and all the freaking elves had gone to Talpirion, or what was the name of the city? Where Manwë is at? Anyways, they went to Manwë's city.
Yeah. I can't remember.
Telperion's the name of the tree. I can't
the tree was
the name
Tar,
of the city.
and then Tar Telperion was the forest.
Tyrion, maybe?
Ooh, Tyrion sounds about right.
I think that might have actually been the city of the Noldor in...
The Noldor city was Tyrion.
Anyways, the city of Manwë, wherever that is, whatever that's called. Yeah. All the elves really had gone there. So he's wandering in these, what appears to be forsaken cities in Valinor. And for a moment, he's like, holy crap, did Morgoth, like, somehow reach his fingers over here and kill everybody? Like, what is going on?
Dude.
This can't be right. Anyway, so he's wandering through, but eventually is... there are certain Teleri elves that were on watch, right? He just hadn't seen them. So they're like, what the frick? Someone's come with a Silmaril. Like, go tell Manwë right away. So they rush over there. They let him know. And then Ingwe, the bannerman, essentially, of Manwë, comes to Erendil himself and, like, welcomes him into the city of Manwë. He pleads for pardon. Let's see here. Let me just read some of this. There were, but some there were who saw him from afar, and the great light that he bore, and they went in haste to Valimar. That's what it's called, Valimar. But Erendil climbed the green hill of Tuna, and found it bare, and he entered into the streets of Tyrion, and they were empty, and his heart was heavy, for he feared that some evil had come into the Blessed Realm.
So it was Tyrion.
Tyrion is the name of the Noldor city, but Valimar is the name of Manwë city.
There we go then, okay.
So Tyrion was empty, and that's what he was worried about. He walked in the deserted ways of Tyrion, and the dust upon his raiment, and his foot, the lands of men. Anyways, goes on. Erendil stood before their faces, delivered the errand of the two kindreds. Pardon he asked for the Noldor, and pity for their great sorrows, and the mercy upon men and elves, and succor in their need, and his prayer was granted. So the Valar are finally like, all right, let's do this. And they go and wage a gigantic frickin' war on Morgoth. It is intense.
Yeah, it's something else.
It changes
this is where Morgoth finally has his big dragon that he's just like been waiting to unleash. And it's very big. It is, I think it's considered the biggest dragon in mythology, right? In all of...
Yes. We'll get into I have some sources for this. We're going to get into the size of the Ankalagon the Black here.
He's freaking unbelievable. He's like way too big.
We'll get in here in just a second because this is pretty sweet. But before that, I wanted to read this part. Now, this is going back to Morgoth in Middle-earth. It says, yet it is said that Morgoth looked not for the assault that came upon him from the west, for so great was his pride become, that he deemed that none would ever again come with open war against him. Moreover, he thought that he had forever estranged the Noldor from the lords of the west, and that content in their blissful realm of Valar, content in their blissful realm, the Valar would heed no more his kingdom in the world without. For to him that is pitiless, the deeds of pity are ever strange. Let me read that again. I think I messed up. For to him that is pitiless, the deeds of pity are ever strange and beyond reckoning. Now, remember earlier in the book when Manwë brought Morgoth back out of his imprisonment in Valimar after I don't know how long, many ages that he had been a prisoner there. Yeah. And people were worried about it. And it said that Manwë pardoned him because there was no evil in his heart, therefore he could not understand evil. Right. I loved the sort of bookend, so to speak, of this between the two brothers, Manwë and Melkor here, where Manwë could not understand the depth of Melkor's evil and wanted to pardon him, and Melkor could not understand why the Valar would ever come back to save the Noldor.
Yeah, people who they're not very as connected with.
Because he had no pity in his own heart, so he couldn't understand pity in Manwë.
And in some ways, it's less pity and more mercy, right? Because Manwë has the power. I feel pity is a little more like you can't do anything about it, or you won't do anything about it, but you still feel bad.
Sure.
But whereas in the case of Manwë, and this is something I think Morgoth, you know, it kind of miscalculates, but within the case of Manwë, it's more along the lines of mercy than pity.
Sure.
And Morgoth doesn't understand mercy or pity, so it's like
doesn't get it at all. So he was surprised when the hosts of Manwë came and the Valar finally came to fight him, and it did not go well for him at first. He was getting beat really bad, and it says that like as a last sort of like resort, like he emptied. Well, let me read this part first because this is kind of cool. The meeting of the hosts of the West and the North is named the Great Battle and the War of Wrath. There was marshaled the whole power of the throne of Morgoth, and it had become great beyond count, so that Anfaglith could not contain it. I think that's the land that is like the valley leading up to Angband, right?
Oh, yeah.
So that entire valley was just filled with his armies, right? And all the North was set aflame with war. But it availed him not. The Balrogs were destroyed, save some few that fled and hid themselves in caverns, inaccessible at the roots of the earth. And this is where the Balrog of the Lord of the Rings comes in. That thing had been hiding down there under the mountains since the first age.
Ever since then, yeah.
Since the end of the first age in the War of Wrath. So under the entire events that happened in the second age, which is we'll get into in the Akalabeth, and through most of the events of the Third Age, which leads up to the Lord of the Rings at the end of the Third Age, for 2 full ages of time, that Balrog had just been chilling out there in the freaking caverns way down there.
Yep.
So when Gandalf calls it a demon of the ancient world,
yeah,
it's super ancient. Super ancient world. Anyways, I thought that was cool. It also says here that a great part of the sons of men, whether of the people of Uldor or others new come out of the east, marched with the enemy, and the elves do not forget it. So in this war, only the 3 houses of the Edain fought on the part of the Valar. So the House of Beor, the House of Malek, the House of Haldir, I think it is, or Haleth, I can't remember which one. Anyways, one of those H names. Of one of the 3, those 3 houses of the Edain fought on behalf of the Valar, and that was it. Every other, I guess, tribe of men were allied with Morgoth in this war. And so it says the elves do not forget it. This comes into the lineage of the Edain, called eventually the Dun Edain. Notice how the word Edain is in both words, right? Edain and the Dun Edain, right? So anyways, the descendants of those 3 houses are blessed, and that'll lead into the Second Age events, but we'll get there in just a second. Okay, so here it is. Now we've come to the father, not the father of all dragons, that's Glaurung, but we'll talk about him too. But I guess the atomic bomb of all dragons.
Yeah,
put it that way. Upon his foes, the last desperate assault that he had prepared, and out of the pits of Angband there issued the winged dragons. So I didn't mention this,
like worm kind of things,
right? I didn't mention this before, but Glaurung, the dragon that had been slayed by Turin and had caused all those problems, the father of all dragons, as he's called, did not have wings. So they were more like lizards, serpents, than like the traditional fantasy dragon you see when you hear the word dragon. So they didn't have wings yet. But now he had a host of winged dragons, and that had not before been seen, and so sudden and ruinous was the onset of that dreadful fleet that the hosts of the Valar was driven back. For the coming of the dragons was with great thunder and lightning and a tempest of fire. So these were the most powerful monsters of all of Morgoth's like creations, I guess you could put it that way. Of anything he devised, these were the most powerful monsters that he came up with, were these winged dragons. Yeah. And the greatest of them was Ankalagan the Black. Yeah. We'll read this little thing here real quick. But Erendil came, shining with white flame, and about Vingalut, which is his ship. It's flying now, by the way. He's not sailing. It's like flying through the air. Fingal gathered all the great birds of heaven, and Thorondor was their captain. So the eagles are fighting these dragons. And there was battle in the air all the day and through the dark night of doubt. Before the rising of the sun, Eärendil slew Akalabeth the Black, the mightiest of dragon hosts, and cast him from the sky. And he fell. Now, this is the only mention of his size that we have. It doesn't actually specify how large he was in any of Tolkien's texts. But you can kind of draw from this next sentence how large he might have been, right? Okay. And he fell upon the towers of Thangorodrim, and they were broken in his ruin. Then the sun arose, and the hosts of the Valar prevailed, and well nigh all the dragons were destroyed, and all the pits of Morgoth were broken and unroofed, and the might of the Valar descended into the deeps. So,
wow,
that's the only clue that we have about his size, but there have been people more well-read in the lore of Middle-earth than me who have drawn some other conclusions. So let's go ahead and take a look at that real quick as well, and we'll get to this. So down here, it says, Akalabeth's size is not specified, but must have been colossal due to the destruction of the towers of Thangorodrim when he fell on them, which are elsewhere identified with the 3 smoking peaks of those mountains. So he smote all 3 of them at the same time, and they were destroyed. And they were on different mountain peaks.
Yeah.
So that gives you a idea of his mountain-esque size, or length at least, right?
Yeah.
However, his size cannot be assumed to be larger than Thangorodrim. Some powerful but small creatures are able to cause great destruction, even in death, such as Durin's Bane breaking the slopes of Celebdil. So we don't know for sure. But there have been some interesting... I'm going to pull up some examples of this here. 1 second. Some interesting sort of like graphs created by different people to like assume his size. First of all, I'll just take a look at this first. So this is a depiction of Akalabeth the Black. He's got his hands clutching the peaks of 2 different mountains here. And you have Eärendil's ship there with the light of the Silmaril and the eagles surrounding his ship, sort of like flying up towards his mouth as he's preparing some kind of blast here. And there's the, as they say, the lightning and the tempests of fire. So this gives
epic.
You this is, at least in this depiction, I like to believe this is the size of the dragon because this is freaking sweet.
Yeah.
However, there have been other depictions. Let me see here. Whoops, that's not what I meant to do. Other depictions. Here we have sort of a comparison between Smaug and about his size. And you remember, you know, how large he was and how destructive to the lake town in The Hobbit. If you've seen the movies, I mean, that's probably a pretty good depiction. But Smaug at least had to be small enough to live inside of a mountain, right? So the size of Smaug, who was a freaking huge dragon in that movie, in comparison to Akalabeth here.
Yeah.
And then they have Glaurung here as well. So that's one depiction that is probably closer, I would think, to the truth. But in this one here, and they have Smaug like that size over there, and a human being like way down there. So if I can actually zoom in on this.
And that was
and, like, see the size of the little pixel of the dude there, right? See, the size of the little pixel man. And then to Smaug, that's about right for the movies. And then we come over here to Glaurung, was freaking huge. And then like, what the fetch?
Yeah, it's insane.
Now, this is the size that I choose to believe in my headcanon that he was, because that's freaking sweet.
Right. Well, and that actually does tend towards... Like, I remember, maybe it was 2 weeks ago, I was talking about how Tolkien had this obsession with the old and the ancient being more glorious and being bigger and greater than whatever has come after it, right? The greatest of the things were, you know, older and whatever you see in The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, those are tiny compared to what used to be. The kings are less great. They don't live as long. The elvish kings aren't as powerful. The Sauron is just a servant to whoever used to be the, you know. So, but this is one of those things where it's like, you got Smaug, right? He's freaking huge. That's insane. You got the Nazgul in Lord of the Rings. But holy crap, this is like, he takes that logic to a completely, you know, opposite extreme of like, it's freaking 1,000 times bigger. And like, whoa, hold on, Tolkien. You don't need to go that far to show that things were better back in the day. Yeah. But that's what he does. One other thing. This is funny. Vishalak says, what does he even eat? And I'm thinking,
good question.
That's a real good question.
Maybe he eats the power of Morgoth. Morgoth was continually like issuing his power out into his armies and stuff, right? And that he diminished his own power.
Yeah. So he was
could be a possibility that he was feeding this dragon and raising it through just issuing his own power into him.
Yeah.
That's totally conjecture on my part.
Well,
nothing supports that whatsoever.
He could have fed him with orcs and humans and elves and things that he caught also. Oh, I was going to also say Ungoliant and Shelob.
Yes, true.
The Tolkien does this like all the time. But yeah, the oh, what was I saying? He could have just been feeding him prisoners and all sorts of things. But even that wouldn't satiate something that big. He'd need to eat like 1,000 humans per meal, right? And that's like,
right.
Like you even Morgoth couldn't have conjured that kind of, you know, craziness.
Yeah. So I say this saying that I wish that particular like comparison of size was true. But there's nothing that actually specifies that he was what size he was, other than he broke the towers of Thingordrum. That's all we know. So he was big, but we don't know how big. Yeah. Greg says nostalgia goggles, talking about Tolkien's way of looking at things in the past being greater than
it shows like crazy in his writings, like crazy. Everything was way better. The further back you go, the better things were, and the greater things were. And
he goes on to say, music was way better in the past. Old books are better. Crime and Punishment is better because it was old. Wait a minute.
Well, some people say that.
Well, I think he's poking fun at himself there for saying that old Crime and Punishment
because
is better.
It's old. I know.
So Vishalak, I think Ankalagan was probably more of a liability than an asset. Well, if he broke the entire freaking stronghold of Thingord or Angband in his fall, then I guess so, right? Kaysen was going to say something there. I think we lost him.
Clearly, but other
Hold on. Are you there?
Yeah.
We'll get him in a second. Okay, he's back.
Am I back? I'm back now, right? Okay, sorry about that. Oh, what was I going to say? Dang it. You would just, the liability of an asset. So the fact that the dragons were at least initially able to push the Valar back, I don't know that that could have been accomplished really
without them. Yeah.
Any other way. Because, so I think it may seem, you know, a 50,000 years of liability, and then you get this one big push, and he wouldn't, obviously in the end, hindsight's 2020. Yeah, that was wasted time. It didn't work, but it worked better than anything else he had done. And it seemed to kind of maybe be possible that he could have won just by driving back the Valar a little bit. So I'd say, even though it was more of a liability than asset, it was probably the best shot he had of winning.
I also love how he doesn't describe how it was that Arendelle slew this dragon. He just says he did.
Even if you stab it, you're not breaking through his skin layer with a 4-foot sword. You're not even. How do you kill someone?
No idea how he did this, but Arendelle, we talked about Fingolfin being the biggest beast of all the Noldor. Yeah. Arendelle's the biggest beast of any child of Iluvatar for this feat.
Sure, but if only they would go into more detail there, then maybe we can give him the mantle. But I still prefer Fingolfin because we just get more. Like, we don't get anything here other than he also had help from the Eagles. He didn't do it all himself.
Yeah, true.
And his boat was flying and all that stuff.
Anyways, good stuff. Greg Troyan is bringing up your shirt.
Yeah.
Notice the Kiss font. Yeah, so we both got these. It was a gig. It was something a couple years ago that we went to a meeting for. And they had all those different 70s and 80s bands, rock band Well, actually, I think even the Beatles are on there somewhere. But
yeah, and then there's like a '90s, like Nine Inch Nails, and anyways, yeah, lots of stuff on the shirt, but it's all from Gig, right? I just like it, so I still wear it. But
yeah, it has all those great rock bands logos, but with the Gig.
Yep,
It's a cool idea. Good shirt. I have one too.
Good shirt. Yes, we all got one.
Okay, so here is the end of the Silmarillion. I like this description of Morgoth being defeated. There Morgoth stood at last at bay, and yet unvaliant. I love that part. And yet unvaliant. And he fled into the deepest of his minds and sued for peace and pardon, but his feet were hewn from under him. I like to also believe that it doesn't just mean they swept him, but like they cut his legs off.
Literally, yeah.
Yeah, I like to believe that that's what it means. His feet were hewn from under him, and he was hurled upon his face. Then he was bound with the chain of Angainor, which he had worn aforetime, and his iron crown they beat into a collar for his neck. And his head was bowed upon his knees, and the two Silmarils which remained to Morgoth were taken from his crown, and they shone unsullied beneath the sky. And Eonwë, I think I said Ingwe earlier. Ingwe was the elf lord, the leader of the
Vanyar, right?
The Vanyar, yes.
Yeah.
He is not he's not Manwë's messenger. Eonwë is a Maiar, and he was Manwë's messenger. He's the one that came and found Arendelle and led him there or whatever. I probably misspoke by saying Ingwe earlier.
Okay.
Eonwë took them and guarded them. So Eonwë now has two of the Silmarils. How do we think this is going to go with the remaining sons of Fëanor? Gosh dang it.
Their fate. It's a cruel fate.
But there's some great dialogue here between Maedhros and Maglor about what they should try and do about this. It says, then Eonwë, the herald of the Elder King, summoned the elves of Beleriand to depart from Middle-earth. So he's saying, all right, all of you, you're allowed to come back now. Let's get going. You'll receive your judgment at the feet of the Valar.
Right.
But Maedhros and Maglor would not hearken, and they prepared, though now with weariness and loathing, to attempt in despair the fulfillment of their oath. For they would have given battle for the Silmarils were they withheld, even against the victorious host of Valinor, even though they stood alone against all the world. And they sent a message before Eonwë, bidding him yield up now those jewels which of old Fëanor their father had made, and Morgoth stole from him. And I love the answer from Eonwë. And Eonwë answered that the right to the work of their father, which the sons of Fëanor formerly possessed, had now perished because of their many and merciless deeds, being blinded by their oath, and most of all because of their slaying of Dior and the assault upon the havens. The light of the Silmarils should go now into the west, whence it came in the beginning, and to Valinor must Maedhros and Maglor return, and there abide the judgment of the Valar, by whose decree alone would Eonwë yield the jewels from his charge. So again, another moment of potential pride getting in the way, right? They could go into the west, humble themselves before the Valar, talk to them about some way to overcome this oath that they had taken. Instead, they talk to each other about it, and this is kind of what they come to. Hold on. Then Maglor desired indeed to submit, for his heart was sorrowful, and he said, the oath says not that we may not bide our time, and that it may not, and it may be that in Valinor all shall be forgiven and forgot, and we shall come into our own in peace. Maglor's got the right idea.
A humble approach, more so.
Yeah. Maglor, I changed my mind. Maglor was actually the best of the sons of Fëanor, not Maedhros.
only in the end, but I guess the true colors do show a little bit when you're...
Right. It says, but Maedhros answered
in the
that
position...
if they... Oh, we lost you there for a second. You still there? Hello? 1 second. He'll be back. Takes a second. Let me move back to here. Kaysen? Oh, I'll continue. He'll come back. But Maedhros answered that if they returned to Aman, but the favor of the Valar were withheld from them, then their oath would still remain, but its fulfillment be beyond all hope. And he said, who can tell to what dreadful doom we shall come if we disobey the powers in their own land, or purpose ever to bring war again into their holy realm? So, again, a pretty solid counterpoint. Like, if we go there and they don't give the Silmarils to us, we're still going to be bound by our oath, but it would be way freaking worse if we tried to fight them in Valinor than if we did it right here. It'd be way worse. Yeah, you back, Kason?
Hey.
Okay, so all I said was that Maethros' counterpoint was, if we go into Valinor and they choose not to give the Silmarils to us, we're still going to be bound by our oath, but it's going to be 1,000 times worse if we try to bring war upon them in their own land versus doing it now.
Dude, that oath sucks.
I know.
Don't ever take an oath like that, guys.
Never freaking take oaths.
Requires you to maybe kill people. Don't take that oath.
Don't take oaths where you swear you'll kill people if they don't do something.
Yes, please don't.
Yet Maglor still held back, saying, if Manwë and Varda themselves deny the fulfillment of an oath to which we named them in witness, is it not made void? Again, he's trying his hardest to come to the result that we don't have to do this, man. But Maethros answered, how shall our voices reach to Iluvatar beyond the circles of the world? And by Iluvatar we swore in our madness, and called the everlasting darkness upon us if we kept not our word. Who shall release us? And I love this of the last one from Maglor. This is the best one. If none can release us, said Maglor, then indeed the everlasting darkness shall be our lot, whether we keep our oath or break it. But less evil shall we be in the breaking.
Nice. Interesting.
But, alas.
I know.
They just can't control themselves.
Right.
They go and they slay the guards who are guarding the Silmarils, so they kind of go in ninja-like.
Yeah.
They take the Silmarils and they leave, and they split it between them. And it says, go ahead.
What they do with the Silmarils is like, dudes, what was the point?
Yeah.
Why did you have to do that?
So it says, each of them took to himself a Silmaril, for they said, since one is lost to us, and but two remain, and we two alone of our brothers, so is it plain that fate would have us share the heirlooms of our father. So they split it between them. They're never going to get Arundil's Silmaril back. He's flying around in his ship way up in the sky. They're never going to go up there and get that from him. So like, all right, we'll split the last two. But the jewel burned the hand of Maethros in pain unbearable. So even though he was supposed to be protected in the oath as one of the only people who could obtain the Silmaril without the pain, he is actually burned by it now, which means the oath was essentially made void. He perceived that it was Anwë, as Anwë had said, and that his right thereto had become void, and that the oath was vain. So they had once again made a horrible evil choice, and it turned out that the entire freaking oath was made void anyways. And in anguish and despair, he cast himself into a gaping chasm filled with fire, and so ended, and the Silmaril that he bore was taken into the bosom of the earth.
Yeah.
And it is told of Maglor that he could not endure the pain with which the Silmaril tormented him, and he cast it into the sea, and therefore he wandered ever upon the shores, singing in pain and regret beside the waves. And it says here, and thus it came to pass that the Silmarils found their long homes, one in the airs of heaven, with Erendil, one in the fires of the heart of the world, that was Maethros's, and one in the deep waters where Maglor cast it. And that's where they ended up. No one else can recover them now. They are unobtainable. Okay, and then a bunch of the elves...
That's the end of the Silmarils.
Yeah, a bunch of the elves leave at that point, leave Beleriand to go back into the west. They're pardoned. A lot of them end up living on Tol Eressëa, the island. Some of them remain. Major players that remain in Beleriand, in Middle-earth, because Beleriand is essentially destroyed in that war. The entire face of the freaking land has changed. But Galadriel remains... with her husband Celeborn, who was of the kingdom of Doriath, right? He was one of the Sindar. So she remains there with him. Gil-galad, who is now the High King of the Noldor in Middle-earth, he stays behind. of course, I forgot his name again. The Havens guy.
Oh, Círdan.
Círdan never went to the west in the first place, so he stayed behind as a Teleri that never actually sailed west.
Yeah.
And it was given of the sons of Arundel to choose their fate, whether they would be of elves or men. So we have Elros and Elrond. Elrond chooses to be of the firstborn, becomes an elf, one of the mighty elf lords of Middle-earth that remain behind. Elros chooses to become, or chooses the fate of men, and becomes the first king of Númenor. So those men, the houses of the Edain who fought on the behalf of the Valar in that War of Wrath, they are gifted an island of their own, sort of in between Valinor and Middle-earth. And so that they can see the glory of Valinor from there's a giant mountain that's on their island.
Yeah, it's kind of like the religious
it's like a temple
hub, because from the peak of it you can see where the gods reside.
Yeah, so they can see Valinor, like the most far-sighted of them could see from the top of that mountain. They can see Valinor. And they can also see into the west the kingdoms and lands of Middle-earth. So they're kind of a bridge between the two. But they are not allowed to sail into the west at all. They are not allowed to go there. They have to stay on their island of Númenor. And Elros becomes the first king. So Elrond's brother becomes the first king of those people living there. Now, here's the very end of the Silmarillion here. I like what it says. Ever on the walls, Arundel keeps watch upon the ramparts of the sky. Yet the lies of that Melkor, the mighty and accursed Morgoth Boglir, the power of terror and of hate, sowed in the hearts of elves and men, are a seed that does not die and cannot be destroyed, and ever and anon it sprouts anew and will bear dark fruit even unto the latest days. That seed is pride. And we will get into that in a minute. And if we remember to the beginning of the book, he was the first one to let his pride get in the way, and his downfall was pride. And so that's what he does. He sows seed of pride and lies and discontent, and his enemies, for the most part, hurt themselves more than he hurts them through their deceit amongst each other and their pride getting in the way. Okay, so now we move into the Akalabeth, which is after the Quenta Silmarillion, and this is the story of the Second Age. I will try to really quickly sum this one up, but again, this was the one that stood out to me the most of all the readings on this particular reading of the Silmarillion. So, the Númenóreans are there on the island, and they are given the gift of long life. Now, things that are originally meant as gifts can so easily turn into a burden and into something that becomes a strife. So they live for many, many long years. They live like 500 years.
Yeah. They
live a long time, much, much longer than the men who remained in Middle-earth, the Easterlings and the men of Harad to the south. And these Númenóreans, the Dunedain, they're taller, they're stronger, they're wiser, they're more skilled, they live many, many times longer. And so they become almost like gods to the men of Middle-earth. Because the Númenóreans will sail back into the east, and they would teach the men there and sort of like lift their darkness from them. And there's kind of these periods of time where they are not trusted, and while they submitted to the Númenóreans, they still worshipped the darkness, and they still would rather turn to Sauron, who was actually, we'll get into that in a minute too, but Sauron had originally almost in good faith repented of all he had done, and his pride was the only thing that got in the way of going to Valinor and seeking the pardon of the Valar. But he didn't. He hid instead, and he stayed in Middle-earth, and slowly his heart turned to darkness again. And so he's still there in Middle-earth. And Gil-galad and Elrond and all those people left over still have to deal with him and his armies in Middle-earth while all this is happening in Númenor. Go ahead.
Well, what's funny is that it's almost like a choice of where you're going to be. Like Sauron Sauron was the decision to stay in Middle Earth as opposed to go to Valinor being the thing that ultimately brings him towards what he is it's funny because he's around a bunch of people that he is more powerful than. Basically everyone, every single person that's in that whole continent, he is essentially better than them, right? Because he's a Maya. He, you know, he's got enormous potential. And so just, even if his heart may have been in the right place or not, the fact that he would put himself in a position where he eventually could, over some period of time, through just, I don't know, just sometimes people get into this, but he felt like he should probably be their leader because he's more powerful than anyone else. He lives forever. He's kind of one of the godlike things. Why like, how come these elf people can rule? And, you know, why can't he rule? And I'm sure that kind of stuff just grinds him. And then it's before you know it, it's like, hey, I'm going to be the king of Middle Earth now. And it's like, all right, dude.
Well, and this isn't like explored in any tremendous depth. It is more so with Melkor than it is with Sauron, but it is mentioned. I think I screenshotted it, but we'll see for sure. But in the early part of the book, before the music of the Ainur, it said that Melkor grew weary of the void. So he was impatient with the wastefulness of it. He wanted order. He wanted more order.
Sure.
He wanted it to be structured and organized. And that is not necessarily a bad thing to want, right? Like, his original intention was not evil. He just saw it as a waste of space. He saw it as a waste, and he wanted the flame imperishable so he could go and fill that void with people and things and beautiful things to enjoy. But he wanted to accomplish that himself. He felt Iluvatar was too slow and too wasteful with the void. And it says that Sauron was similarly was of the people of Aule originally. He was a Maar who served Aule. And he also has this priority in his mind for order and structure and stuff like that. And that was what drew him, or part of what Morgoth used to draw him to his side, was this: we're going to order these lands and like have like a solid structure to it. And so that was originally his intent, was that he just did not like the chaos that was happening and wanted it to be ordered and structured and wanted, I don't know other way to put it, order, lack of chaos, right? But in that pursuit, especially the lack of humility to do it the way that Iluvatar stated it should be done, leads to more chaos because they're fighting and destroying the things that the Valar are creating. So in any case, Vishalak says he wanted to play ActRaiser. Yes. He wanted to be a god, more or less. He wanted to order and structure things according to his will rather than to the will of Iluvatar. So the pride there leads over time again to him deciding he's going to announce himself as the king of Middle-earth. And this is not met well by that at that point king of Numenor. But we'll get to that in a minute. We're not quite there yet. Because a similar process happens in the hearts of the Numenorian king. Because they live for, I think, a fairly long time. I want to say 2,000 years, but it might not have been quite that long. I might be misremembering. But remember, these people live 500 years. So this is like 4 generations later. It's not that much later, generationally speaking. But it is very much a long time later. The Numenorians have been there in peace all this time. They've explored all the seas in the east. They have nowhere left to go except west. And their hearts always yearn for that. And they are like, why can't we go there? Like, why? Like, what's the difference between you? What makes you better than me? Why can't I go there? And by the very virtue of the blessing of their long life, they start to cling to their life more. They start to value their lives more. They start to say, why do we have to die? It becomes a greater burden, the thought of death, than it would have been otherwise, because they get to live for all these many, many hundreds of years and build so many great things and accomplish so many great things. And then the more of those accomplishments and achievements they have, the more attached they are to the world. Yeah. So the blessing of the Valar was almost a curse. Actually, it was more of a curse than it was a blessing, because they hated the thought of death. They hated their fate, which was a gift from Iluvatar, even more because of their longer lifespans. And so there's another really good passage. Another really good passage of so there's a representative of the Valar, one of the elves of Valinor, comes to sort of like talk to them about it and try to like counsel with them, right, and help put their hearts at ease. Eastward they must sail, but never ever their hearts return to the west. Okay. All right, right here. I think I found it. It says, now this yearning grew ever greater with the years, and the Númenóreans began to hunger for the undying city that they saw from afar, and the desire for everlasting life, to escape from death, and the ending of delight grew strong upon them, and ever as their power and glory grew greater, their unquiet increased. For though the Valar had rewarded the Dunedain with long life, they could not take away from them the weariness of the world that comes at last, and they died, even their kings of the seed of Erendil, and the span of their lives was brief in the eyes of the Eldar. And then the next page. Okay, here we go. Here's the dialogue. And they said among themselves, why do the lords of the west sit there in peace unending, while we die and go and know not whither? We know not whither, leaving our home and all that we have made. And the Eldar die not, even those that rebelled against the lords. Okay, again, not necessarily a bad desire to begin with. They just want to have equality with the Eldar. And so it's like, these Eldar rebelled against their lords, the Noldor did, and they still get to have peace in Valinor. What's up with that? And we don't get that, right? And we fought for you. And since we have mastered all seas, and no water is wild or so wide that our ships cannot overcome it, again, a kind of a prideful statement there, why should we not go to Avalone and greet there our friends? Right? We want to go to where you live and see your homes. We don't want you to have to always come to us. And some there were who said, why should we not go even to Aman and taste there, for a day, the bliss of the powers? Have we not become mighty among the people of Arda? You see how the pride is setting in? The Eldar reported these words to the Valar, and Manwë was grieved, seeing a cloud gather on the noontide of Númenor, and he sent messengers to the Dunedain, who spoke earnestly to the king and to all who would listen, concerning the fate and the fashion of the world. The doom of the world, they said, one alone can change who made it. Speaking of Iluvatar, obviously. And were you so to voyage... And were you so to voyage that, escaping all deceits and snares, you came indeed to Aman, the blessed realm, little would it profit you, for it is not the land of Manwë that makes its people deathless, but the deathless that dwell therein have hallowed the land, and there you would but wither and grow weary the sooner, as moths in the light too strong and steadfast. Now, a fair point, it's not the lands that make the Eldar immortal. They are immortal, and so because of their immortality, they hollowed the lands into the blessedness that it is. They've had all these many thousands of years to continue to increase and make greater things, and it's like, but considering the pride of the people they're talking to the last part of that, I think is it was a misstep to say you would wither and grow weary the sooner, as moths of light too strong and stuff. So you're not strong enough to to be able to withstand the light of Aman. But the king said, and does not Erendil, my forefather, live? Or is he not in the land of Aman? He's like, but wait a minute, our forefather is there with you right now. He's still alive. To which they answered, you know that he has a fate apart, and was adjusted to the firstborn who die not. Again, this is what the Dunedain actually want. They just want to change their fate to that of the firstborn. So he got to do that, but you don't get to do that, okay? And this is just grinding them even more. I'll skip ahead a little bit. Nor can the Valar take away the gifts of Iluvatar. The Eldar, you say, are unpunished, and even those who rebelled do not die. Yet that is to them neither reward nor punishment, but the fulfillment of their being. They cannot escape and are bound to this world, never to leave it, so long as it lasts. For their life, for its life is theirs, and you are punished for the rebellion of... Wait. Oh, he's saying that, and you said that you're being punished for the rebellion of men, you say, in which you had small part, and so it is that you die. But that was not at first appointed for a punishment. Thus you escape and leave the world, and are not bound to it, and in hope or in weariness, which of us therefore... sorry, let me read that again, I read it wrong. Thus you escape and leave the world, and are not bound to it, in hope or in weariness. Which of us therefore should envy the others? So keep in mind how this sort of plays into the elves in Middle-earth in The Lord of the Rings, and how freaking sick and tired they are of the world.
Yeah.
And just the thought of immortality in general. I think anyone who is facing death or has faced death and has actually come to terms with that moment there's a biological sort of fear, a need to survive, a need to try to survive.
Oh yeah.
But so the thought of immortality is, I think, on the surface level, really appealing. Like, oh, sure, I could live forever.
It's one less thing to worry about.
Yeah.
Or to be scared of.
Yeah. We're losing you again, Case, and hold on.
Yeah. Do you see me?
Now you're back. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. That was all. It's just one less thing to be scared of.
Yeah, but there's actually two things. One or two, I guess, pieces of fiction that I've consumed in my life where I think they asked or explored this pretty well. Like the idea of what it actually would look like to have immortality. The elves, by the end of the Third Age, are so freaking tired and weary and just like sick and of all the strife of the world that they almost have become totally apathetic. It's like, we've seen this war a million times. Like it just never ends. We just are tired of it. Let's just like freaking leave, go somewhere else. Right. This apathy, boredom of the world. There's nothing like, all of our greatest works have been made. I don't have the energy to make anything better. What more is there to live for at that point? Right?
Yeah.
They can't escape that boredom, everlasting boredom. Whereas like when I had more energy in the past, when I was more enthusiastic, I did great stuff. I'll never accomplish that again. I'm seeing continual strife and hardship and trauma and horrible stuff over and over and over again that I have to continually fight. And for what? Just to see more of it in the future, to have all the things I made become lesser and degrade with time. And that is, in the long run, a lot worse than the thought of dying and escaping that, right? Give me just 1 second. Someone's knocking on my door.
What?
I don't know why.
I did have one thought. Talking about like the fact that the Númenóreans had that mountaintop where they could view Valinor, and from the top of that mountain they were able to see basically the heavens, right? Actually, I want Mike to hear this, so I'm gonna have to say it again anyways. Did Mike get a package?
Is that everything you need? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, thanks. Okay, I'm back. Sorry.
Okay. Did you have something you were talking about the immortality thing?
Yes. So
I have something to say, but it's not as relevant.
The other story that I love that really shows, I think, like the burden of immortality is Lost Odyssey. In Lost Odyssey, the Mistwalker RPG, I have not actually seen Highlander, but I think that is another story that kind of touches on the same thing. But in Lost Odyssey, the main character is immortal and has been alive for thousands and thousands of years. And you sort of explore his memories in these dream sequences, which were written by a novelist in Japan. So they're really beautifully written. They're very poetic. And they touch on the idea of the burden of immortality in a way that I've never seen in anything else. And the fact that, like, now in the elves in Middle-earth, they remember with almost perfect clarity all of these things that happened 3,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, right? They like have these perfect brains that remember everything exactly as it happened. But in Lost Odyssey, his mind works more like a normal mind would, where you forget things with time.
Your brain can't store infinite information.
Right.
At some point, if you're going to keep remembering everything you're seeing all the time, you're going to start forgetting stuff that you saw a long time ago.
Right. Which is also a really interesting way that I felt that game worked in the trope of amnesia, which is a common storytelling trope used in JRPGs to sort of like keep certain information back and reveal it as part of a larger climax later on, or a plot twist. JRPGs use amnesia all the time, but this makes perfect sense. It's like you've been alive for 5,000 years. You can't remember everything that ever happened to you during that time. And so in these dream sequences, he sort of remembers these things and remembers all this stuff that's happened in the past, things that he probably would likely want to forget. And that's true of the elves as well. All these burdens and hardships and trauma and terrible things that have happened in the past, it just completely burdens you over the years. And eventually you don't even want to be there anymore. You just want to escape. So I love that line of which of us therefore should envy the others. Right. I think that's really profound.
Okay. I did have a thought though, unless you had something else you wanted to say.
Go ahead.
One of my thoughts was in reference to the fact that the Numenorians could see heaven from their island, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I feel like Tolkien was a religious guy, right? I think he was a Catholic.
Yeah, Catholic,
and
devout.
A lot of the stuff that he puts in his books they have a lot of religious undertones. And even though he doesn't want to draw direct allegories, this is that and this is that, because he's not doing that, I feel like to some degree he is sort of answering general questions that like what do you call it? The human condition, right? That humans just have about everything. And that's part of what makes his book so inspired and so good, is because they connect with how humans kind of feel and think. And, you know, a lot of people who believe in heaven would maybe have the thought that it would be nice if they could see heaven, or if they could have some confirmation or some way that the gods could manifest to them, and then that would be great, right? Because then, well, they wouldn't be faithful anymore. It would just be like they see it. It's right there, right? It's right there. Mm-hmm. But I think Tolkien illustrates a little bit of a problem when heaven is just right there and you can see it.
Yeah.
And you're on an island and you can't go there, at least not now, I guess, for them.
You're not allowed to. You're
not
banned.
Ever. But you can't go there. You can just see it. Well, that's a problem, actually, especially for humans. Like, sure, it gets rid of one issue, which is you don't have to have faith anymore. You see it, it's there. The other problem is, wait, but heaven's right there. Why am I here? Why am I here? And there's like, you know, people dying and I'm here and heaven's just like right there. I can literally see it. That's a problem. That's a huge problem for humans, for the way our minds work, for the way we perceive the world, for everything, right? I feel like Tolkien's kind of like exploring this idea a little bit, because clearly Numenor was a bit of an experiment from the Valinor, right? They're like, well, they're half people, half elves. Let's give them like a place in the middle, right?
Yeah.
And the experiment failed, and they decided, you know what, just this doesn't work. We can't let them see our shores. They're just going to be envious their entire lives. We don't want that. Like, they either you're man or elf. Like we're not doing this in between stuff anymore. It doesn't work. We can't let them see our shore. It just makes them want to come here, and then they start to resent.
We're losing you. We're losing you. Just so you know.
much to
1 second. I think you finished your point, but you're back now.
More or less, I finished my point. But they just kind of did away with the whole thing because it didn't pan out. The experiment did not work. Humans cannot be in the sight of the heavens without a tremendous amount of envy in their hearts.
Yeah, that's actually a really, really good point. There's a couple things I want to address in the comments here. This one was kind of a joke from Colin. Mike, are you describing elves or is this a personal story? And I think he's referring to the fact that I've been real burned out recently. But that is partly why this spoke to me, I think, is that, like, I'm only 31 years old, coming on 32 here shortly. And I'm already starting to understand, and I think this is why it spoke to me now and maybe not when I was in my early 20s when I read this, or when I was a teenager, because I was in my youth and I had all this vigor and energy and enthusiasm, and I was going to go out and do all these things, and I had all these ideas. And I'm only, I think, at the beginning of the journey towards true weariness of the world in my lifetime. But I'm starting to see the early seeds of it, where it's like, I made, let's just use videos on the channel, for example. I made Xenogears review or whatever, and it was like a really great thing. I poured my entire heart and soul into that. I worked really hard on it. I made something the best I could possibly make it. My book would probably be a better example. I've been working on that for like 17 years. A work that I put my entire soul into, that I've labored for many, many years to create. And when that is done and that's released and I accomplish that work, I can't imagine that I will have the same enthusiasm again for the next thing I work on. Even if it's slightly diminished, even if it just won't mean the same thing to me. Because I put so many years of my life and so much of my youth, the energy of my youth into that is now starting to, it's only downhill from here. I'm not going to get the peak of my physical life goes downhill from here. My youth is behind me. So the fact that I'm beginning to feel that already, and then imagining what that would be like, not just for the rest of my life on Earth, which will probably be another maybe 60 years if I'm lucky, but extending that to another 10 times longer, 1,000 years, how eventually that just wears on you to the point where you just can't anymore. It's just like, I'm tired, man. I'm sick. I'm tired.
I tell you what, people who are 40, 50, they already don't know how to use a freaking cell phone or a computer, or like they don't play video games. And it's like, the world has already moved beyond people who are only like 50, like middle-aged people, right? And they become just older, and okay, some old people are very pleasant, but they just don't get how the world works now, right? They just don't. And that's fine. They've got their own little thing, but multiply that by 20. Get people from the 1500s, and now there's a cell phone. Like it's not even in the realm of possibilities that they wouldn't even want to. They wouldn't want anything to do with it. They'd be like, "This is stupid. Like you kids and your gadgets. I've seen this literally 1,000 times now. Just go have fun. I'm gonna live my own way." And that's kind of what the elves are and what immortality does. I mean, the resentment that you get when you're 30, multiplied by 20 is just, it's pretty unbelievable.
It's when you start thinking about it that way, you will always, the greatest days will be the ones of your youth, when you had the most vigor and enthusiasm and energy, and you had the most optimistic view of the world and of your life and of all the things you were going to accomplish, because you were just getting started on the journey. That to you will always be the best days. Those were the best days. For us, it was the 1990s and maybe early 2000s. Like, that was the best time to be alive. Because as you get older and you see things don't go your way, and some of your dreams don't come to pass the way you had hoped, and you have to sort of accept the troubles of life, you just get a more jaded view. And that's just compounded the longer you live.
Right.
And you always
the longer
yearn
you live,
for
the more that like death and suffering become like the closer they get, I guess, to you. Whereas when you're a kid, they're so far away from you that it's just not a problem. You just you don't think about that stuff.
Yeah.
And then the older you get, the more you kind of start having to think. Like, for instance, I bought a life insurance policy a couple of years ago. And I was like, I didn't have a life insurance policy because I was young. I didn't need one. And all of a sudden, you know, I got married and had a kid and was like, I need life insurance now. Like, I have to, like, what if I die? Like, it's just a whole new thing happens that I never really had to worry about before. But it's like, it just becomes an increasingly
we lost you there for a second. It comes in increasingly. That's where we lost you.
Oh,
now you're back.
An increasing possibility, I guess, for the rest of my life.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah, I just found that was, and this was part of that interview. I think I linked it in one of the earlier book club episodes on YouTube for the Silmarillion. But he was talking, Christopher Tolkien was talking about how his father became less and less interested in detailing the historical side of his world, like all the events that happen and the wars and stuff. He became more and more interested in the concept of immortality, like what that means and the difference of the fates. That became more and more what he was interested in exploring with what he was writing. And I don't know, it just comes across really strongly to me here in the Akalabeth. And it makes those moments of the Lord of the Rings stand out a lot more. The elves being apathetic and just not being as great as they once were. A couple of other things here from some of the comments before we move on. Vesalius says, I wonder if the elves had a version of assisted suicide if one of them got a bad brain injury or disability.
That's interesting, but no. I'd say
never know.
Just learn how to meditate, or, you know, just like that way you can just kind of sit down and just blank out for centuries. I don't know, just kind of let your brain just kind of go and just try to be one with the earth, you know?
I'm reminded of Feanor's mother, right? Like, she just couldn't stand being in the world anymore after giving birth to him, and so she went to the gardens of Yavanna, I think it was, or no, Nienor, I can't remember. Nienna, the Valar Nienna. Went there to try and heal, and couldn't. So she passed into the Halls of Mandos. It's just like, I can't take it anymore. It's too much. So that did happen to some degree. Just
kind of decide that,
or maybe she just died of natural causes. I don't know. Anyways, but they still can't leave the world. They still have to stay in the Halls of Mandos, right? And eventually, kind of come back to life in Valinor again. So
that is a cycle of life, and I think that's why Vesalius mentions the disability brain injury thing, because that way you don't, like, you're not dead.
Yeah,
you're just not anymore a conscious organism. You are completely, you know, baked, and it's like a lobotomy or something. Like, do they perform lobotomies so that they don't have to? I don't know. I think that elves would also have a fear of death the way that men do, despite the fact that they are immortal and that the Halls of Mandos eventually allow for some type of resurrection of their former selves. They still don't want to die, and that may play a factor.
Okay, then we got Vishalak with a couple things. I think the worst thing about being an immortal with limited memory would be forgetting your family from the start of your life and your friends and such. Because as you live past others of your kin, you become less and less attached to them with every generation. It's dangling the sausage in front of the dog. Yeah, so that's actually what
Treebeard talks about that, actually, in the Lord of the Rings.
And
he's seen so many kings come and go. He's like, okay, which one is it now? Like, I don't even know you guys.
Yeah, exactly. That's explored really well in Lost Odyssey too, because he does forget family members, and then he remembers their lives and them dying and the grief of that. Yeah. But I've also thought about this. If I was granted immortality, but my friends were not, now this is not exactly what the elves deal with, but they do when their friends die, like the Noldor, who the princes who were slain, or their lost friends or whatever.
Which is why the kinslaying was so bad.
Yeah.
It's not just but so it, they're
Okay, we lost you too much. It's totally out. Hold on. I think we might lose you all the way this time. Yeah, I think we lost him all the way this time. He was talking about why the kinslaying was so bad, but think about your very first friends. Friends, I'm not just saying like friends when you were a kid, you know, that were like neighbors or whatever you played with at school, but your first like true friends that became like lifelong friends. For me, that would be the Sperry family, so Kaysen and Landon and Parker and their family was the first group of friends I had where I knew I was going to be in touch with these people and be friends with these people for my entire life. Now imagine that you live so long that all of those people, your mother and father, all your brothers and sisters, all the friends that you knew, they pass away, but you continue to linger on. And it's like, would I become friends with my friend's children? Like Kaysen's daughter? You know, Kaysen has a son on the way. Would I become friends with? That's weird, right? It's not the same. And like everyone's younger than you. Nobody remembers the days of your childhood. You can't relate with anybody anymore. And so, as Vishalak is saying, I think that your attachment to every generation lessens and lessens the longer you live. And it's just like, holy crap, like it becomes a burden and you want to escape it and there's nothing left for you. There's no joy in it anymore. And for the elves, I mean, a lot of their friends that they lost in these wars and stuff like that, it's a similar feeling, I think. It's like, why should Gil-galad care about, you know, any of the elves born in Middle Earth? Anyways, I think you guys know what I'm saying. So I think that the debate here between the Númenóreans and the elves about which really is the blessing, eternal life or the ability to escape the world, is really, really, it's more profound than it would seem at a first glance. Okay, he's back. So you were saying this is why the kinslaying was so bad.
Right. Because when you just think about it in terms of they're elves, you can kill them and they'll just come back.
Yeah.
Eventually. But like, who knows if they're actually the same when they come back? Exactly the same.
Mm.
Like, I don't know exactly what the Halls of Mandos is like. I don't know exactly what the restitution process is like. I know it takes a long time, generally speaking, thousands of years, and then they can be restored to their selves again. But there is still...
Crap, I think we lost him again. Okay, you're back. There's still what?
It's all good. I think I made my point, so it's no big deal.
Okay. The only thing that I had said was imagine outliving all of your friends and family for hundreds of years. Like I was talking about how my first lifelong friends, I was telling people, imagine their friends, not like the ones as a kid that they were in the neighborhood, so you played with them, but then you never saw them again, right? But the first friends you had that were lifelong friends. And I brought up your family, right? For me, it's like, imagine outliving all of them, outliving all of your siblings. Would I become friends with your children in the same way that I was with you? Like, no, that's weird. Like, it's not the same. And so you get to the point where there's nobody left from your time who understood like the world from your youth and your generation. And you become less and less attached to every generation after that. And it's just another layer of burden that you can't identify or relate to anyone who's alive anymore. And it's just like, why am I even here? Like, what is the purpose? I can't feel an attachment to the world anymore the way that I once did. And there's nobody else to share it with who I can relate to at all. And so again, this debate about which is really the greater blessing, eternal life or the ability to escape in death, is, I think, more profound than it comes across just on a initial read of the text. It really stuck out to me this time.
Somebody brought up before what did they call it? Like the universe kind of cool down, how eventually the universe will kind of expand so much and the distance between things will be so great and everything will cool down and black holes will stop forming and galaxies will start to darken a little bit. And all we'll be left with are these dwarf stars that have been around for 100 billion years, and they'll just keep going, but eventually everything will black out, right? I don't know how Tolkien's world works, but I'm just saying, were someone on this earth to live forever, then all of a sudden they have to grapple with that reality of like, well, in 4 billion years, something bad will happen. I don't need to worry about that. But somebody who lives forever, they need to worry about that eventually, right?
Yeah. Couple things, and then we'll try and wrap this up as quickly as possible. Greg Tryon says, when I moved away from my hometown, my dad started hanging out with my friends, and it was weird. Now all my Cleveland friends hang out with my dad, but I've gotten used to it at this point. But it's weird, right? It's something doesn't seem quite right about that.
yeah, totally.
And I think that would be the same. I mean, I don't know how it is for your dad, but I would feel weird if Case and Breezy passed away and their children had grown older and I like started to try to hang out with them. Something would not feel right about that.
show them some games.
And they wouldn't get it. If I tried to, if I tried to show them Secret of Mana, or if I tried to show them Final Fantasy, like they wouldn't be with it. They weren't there. They don't get it. They just can't get it.
Yeah.
And that becomes compounded with the next generation, their children, and then theirs after that. It's totally unrelatable to me at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's quickly summarize the rest of this. So that is the first...
Okay, go ahead.
That was the first sort of darkening of the hearts of the Numenor towards the Valar at that point. But they're still not prideful enough to actually willfully defy them. They're not actually going to try and like sail into the west. They're not actually going to defy their wishes. They just are hurt and prideful, and they decide, we're turning away from the Valar. We're going to do things our own way. But what's so brilliant about this story is how slowly that change happens. One of my biggest problems with the prequel Star Wars trilogy is that Anakin, I mean, he's dealing with this fear of losing his wife. I mean, it's there in the third movie, but he goes from, I need Palpatine alive so he can teach me how to save my wife as his motivation. And then that, I can get why he attacks Mace Windu there. It's like, no, don't kill him. I need him, right? That makes sense. He then turns around from that meeting, becomes Darth Vader, and goes and kills children. Like the same freaking hour.
Right.
And that descent into that level of depravity is totally unbelievable. I cannot buy that he would go from here to here in that short of a space. In the Akalabeth, the descent of the Numenorians from this specific point in time, when they're like, we're envious and pissed and prideful that you won't grant us eternal life, thinking it's being withheld from them as a punishment, to the point where they actually go to war against the Valar, is so slow. And there's so many generations, and there's so much time, and that evolution is so slow that it is completely believable. And it's really, really brilliantly written, in my opinion. But essentially what happens is you have the king men, who are the ones that support the kings who are rebelling against the Valar at this point. At first just in thought or in heart, but later in deed. And then you have the faithful, a smaller portion of the Numenorians who still are faithful to the elves, still talk with the elves, still deal with the elves, that will visit from time to time from Valinor. And they often will sail into the east, and they become friends with Gil-galad and his people in Middle-earth as well. This, over time, more and more and more becomes just this issue of growing pride among the kings of Numenor, and they become more and more evil, and they seek more and more for riches and to dominate others. It's like, if we can't have everlasting life, what we want, we're going to sail into Middle-earth, and we're going to establish kingdoms there, and we're going to rule those men and subjugate them. So instead of going into the east and bringing, you know, gifts and knowledge and peace, they go there to subjugate, and this turns the men of Harad in the south against them, which establishes this hatred of Gondor, and why the men of Haradrim in the Lord of the Rings march on the part of Sauron against the Numenorian, the remnant of the Numenorian kingdoms. So in any case, this goes on and on and on. There's only one king in Numenor who's a good king. And I think his name is, I think they call him Palantir. And like the entire thought of the Palantir orbs is sort of based on him, like being able to like foresee and give prophecy. I'm sure that I freaking screenshotted it. Let me move way ahead. Tar Anamantir, his son, and they were proud men, eager for wealth. They laid the men of Middle-earth under tribute. Okay, I just screenshotted more examples of pride, because there's a lot of them. Okay, the good king, though. Oh, so in Middle-earth during this time, things are getting worse and worse and worse. Their pride is growing stronger. Sauron has created the rings now. So he's already, I think 3 of the 9 ring wraiths were actually Numenorian men, is what they describe here. So it just keeps talking about the Numenorians turning worse and worse and worse over the hundreds of years. Now this title seemed to the faithful over proud. Oh, because they had a custom of naming their kings in High Elven speech for a long time. And then there's a king who comes and does away with that custom entirely. Now the title seemed to the faithful Numenorians over proud, being the title of the Valar, and their hearts were sorely tried between their loyalty to the house of Elros and their reverence of the appointed powers. So their pride is really getting intense at this point. Okay, the last good king was named... Oh, man, did I screenshot it?
Well, it's Elendil, right?
No, Elendil wasn't a king.
Oh, you mean the last good king before they...
Of Numenor. Yeah.
I get you, yeah.
Anyways, Tar Palantir. Yeah, his name is Tar Palantir. So he took on the original High Elven title again, instead of the R title.
It's Tar, yeah.
Yeah. So, anyways, Tar Palantir was the last good king. He was far-sighted both in eye and in mind, and even those who hated him feared his words as those of a true seer. He gave peace for a while to the faithful, and he went out once more at due season to the Hollow of Eru upon the mountain temple. He was the last king to go there and worship Iluvatar in that place. Anyways, he was the last king, but it says his repentance was too late to appease the anger of the Valar with the insolence of his fathers, of which the greater part of his people did not repent.
Yeah.
So he was the last good king. After him came the really, really bad kings. Now, of those really bad kings that came after him, because he didn't have a son, he had a daughter. And in the Numenorian law, she should have taken the throne, but his nephew wedded her illegally and made himself the king. And he became like a really evil king. But he heard about Sauron in the east, who had claimed to be the king of men, the king of the earth, or whatever. And he was like, I'm going to go put this guy in his place. And the hosts of Numenor go into the east to go to war against Sauron, and Sauron will not even march against them. They are so powerful, and their hosts so great that Sauron is like, I think I need a different plan here. Therefore he humbled himself before Ar-Pharazôn and smoothed his tongue, and then men wondered, for all that he said seemed fair and wise. So Sauron made himself appear very differently than the rumor of him had been, which was his true self. And Ar-Pharazôn essentially took him captive back to Numenor as like a trophy, like Sauron is like my servant kind of thing. But what ends up happening is that he smooth talks his way all the way up into the councils of the king. And this is where the final like stroke of that pride really comes in. And this was, I felt, really profound. And Ar-Pharazôn said, "Who is the Lord of the Darkness?" Oh, because he's telling him about the fact that the Valar had lied about who the real god is, right? They say they invented Iluvatar as a false god to worship so that they could keep you subjugated. And so he's like, the Lord of Darkness is actually a different being. And Ar-Pharazôn said, "Who is the Lord of Darkness?" Then behind locked doors, Sauron spoke to the king, and he lied, saying, It is he whose name is now not now spoken. For the Valar have deceived you concerning him, putting forward the name of Eru, a phantom devised in the folly of their hearts, seeking to enchain men in servitude to themselves. For they are the oracle of this Eru, which speaks only what they will. But he that is their master shall yet prevail, and he will deliver you from this phantom, and his name is Melkor, Lord of all, giver of freedom, and he shall make you stronger than they. That was, I felt, really, really intense, because it's like he's not only supplanted them against the Valar, he's now convinced them that Melkor is the god of the universe.
Yeah.
And he uses the name Melkor, as was previously we had been talking about. Melkor didn't call himself Morgoth, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's so crazy.
Then he decides, or he convinces them to go to war against Valinor. They get their ships. The faithful all flee at this point. They talk about Isildur here. And this, I really like this, because the way they portray Isildur in The Lord of the Rings is only like a portion of the man. We don't really get to see like his full personality. All we really know is he kept the ring. Like he couldn't withstand the temptation. He kept the ring, and they kind of give him that evil look to his face, like, no, I'm going to keep this ring. And they make him seem evil, but he really wasn't. He was an awesome, awesome dude. And before he and Elendil is his father, but Isildur, he stole a seedling of the great white tree, which was a descendant of the tree in Tyrion, which was itself a descendant of one of the original two trees. So there's like a lineage of trees going on here. But anyways, he steals. And
of course, the oldest one is the biggest and greatest.
Of course, the one with the lights, right?
Yeah, that was in the past. The current one's just the little dinky looking tree.
Anyways, he steals a sapling of the white tree that grows there, and he takes it into the east with his father when they flee. And that's the same tree that resides in Gondor in the movies.
Yeah.
So that tree is actually a descendant of the two trees of Valinor. So anyways, the Númenóreans get wiped out. So the faithful, the good ones that are left, go into Middle Earth, and they establish two kingdoms, one in the north and one in the south. So Arnor is in the north, and Gondor is in the south. And Elendil is king in the northern Arnor kingdom, and Isildur essentially wants to take his kingship there as well eventually. But there are two towers in the southern kingdom of Gondor, which become eventually Minas Tirith and Minas Morgul from the movies. They were called something different. There was Minas Arnor and Minas
Ithil.
Ithil
Minas
is what
Ithil,
they were originally called. And so Isildur took the tower that was bordering Mordor, the evil one in the movie, which is Minas Morgul, where the ring wraiths are at. That was his sort of like tower, his castle. And his brother, Anarion, was in Gondor, or Minas Tirith's tower, right? So they ruled there. They had Osgiliath, which was that huge city between them. The southern kingdom really flourished, and the northern kingdom did not. The Dunedain kind of fade away. Their kingdom isn't as strong in the north, and the Ringwraiths and Sauron like really like scatter them. And this is where you get like the hill Amon-Hen and Amon-Ruth, or not Amon-Ruth. Anyways, the two hills in Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring. These are all sort of like remnants of that northern kingdom of Arnor that the Númenóreans set up. But this leads into the great battle against Sauron that is the prologue of the Lord of the Rings. where Gil-galad and all the elves and the Númenórean men of those kingdoms, they march together one last time in an alliance against Sauron's armies. Now, I will also quickly bring up the fact that, as was mentioned earlier, Sauron was not at first completely evil. Like, he sort of repented of what he had done in the First Age and was going to try and be more helpful to the people of Middle-earth. And so Celebrimbor, who is the grandson of Feanor, he is into this ring crafting. He's like, yeah, I'm going to make these rings of power. Right? So we have, of the lineage of the same guy who made the Silmarils, is the guy who makes the rings of power. And Sauron comes to him, but not as Sauron. He takes on a different name and a different form, so they don't know it's him. And he comes and teaches his smithcraft to Celebrimbor, but with the purpose of creating a network of rings that he can control with the one he's going to make. So, like, the elves have these 3 rings that when they put them on, they can see each other's realms and communicate and network with each other, and, like, you know, and the rings sort of work to preserve their kingdoms, preserve the glory of the First Age within those realms. In Imladris, which is Rivendell, in Lothlorien, and then at the Havens with Círdan, the shipwreck.
Círdan, yeah.
So those are the 3 lords that hold those rings: Galadriel in Lothlorien, Elrond in Rivendell, and Círdan at the Havens. But 9 were given to men, 7 to the dwarves. You know, we've all heard that. Anyways, Celebrimbor created these rings with the help of Sauron, who was disguising himself. And essentially the whole plan was, I'm going to help make this network of rings, and then when I put on the one ring, I'll be able to see what all of them are doing and spy on them and control them and everything else. It doesn't really work out, because as soon as he puts on the one ring, the elven lords are aware that he's watching them. So they stop wearing their wings. They keep them, but they
cut on pretty quick.
Yeah, but they don't like that. They don't like him spying on them. Swan Knight says it was Gil-galad at first place who had the Ring of Water. He passed his ring to Elrond after his death. That's a good point. Yes, Gil-galad, the High King of the Noldor at that point in Middle-earth, had the ring first. Anyways, so that leads to basically the Lord of the Rings as we know it. We basically know what happens from there. The remnant of these 2 kingdoms of the Dunedain in Middle-earth, Arnor and Gondor, ally themselves with Gil-galad and the elves for one final battle against Sauron. The ring is cut from his hand and lost, eventually found by Gollum, eventually found by Bilbo, eventually discovered by Gandalf. That leads into the story of the Lord of the Rings. So we get this kind of nice lead up to the Lord of the Rings, if you read that last part of it, which is of the Rings of Power in the Third Age.
Yeah, last like 20 pages.
Yeah. And it's kind of a footnote in all this, but still really cool to see it from that perspective, because when you see the Lord of the Rings films for the first time or read the books, it seems so huge and so epic. But really, it's in the elves' perspective, it's minor in according to the things that they remember, right? In fact, there was a couple of things I was reading. I meant to say this. When we were talking about Ancalagon the Black earlier, there's a section here that says later mentions Gandalf spoke of him, the dragon, Ancalagon, as he told Frodo the true origin of the ring. And here's the quote from Lord of the Rings. It's been said that dragon fire could melt and consume the rings of power, but there is not now any dragon left on Earth in which the old fire is hot enough. So there's no longer a dragon who could melt the rings of power. He's talking about the 3, the 7, and the 9. Nor was there ever any dragon, not even Ancalagon the Black, who could have harmed the One Ring, the ruling ring, for that was made by Sauron himself. So if you decide to continue on after having read this to read the other Middle-earth stories, I think it's so cool after having read this to see those little, like, hints and references to the things of the First Age and the Second Age that are in the Lord of the Rings, and you go like, whoa, your entire perspective of the story is entirely changed when you see it from the perspective of the immortal elves or the Maar Gandalf and the mighty in Middle Earth versus seeing it through the perspective of the hobbits who don't know any of this stuff. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a totally different experience. So I was going to say that if you want to continue, there are many other stories you can read. I would totally suggest reading The Children of Hurin, which goes into way more detail on the curse of Morgoth, on Hurin's family, and that whole tragedy. It's really, really good. There is a Beren and Luthien novel out. I bought it and I was reading it. It's not quite the same as Children of Hurin is. It's more of Christopher Tolkien speaking as himself and sort of like showing the history of how that story came together. It's not really done in the same like novelized format as the Children of Hurin is. There's also one for the Fall of Gondolin, which I think which was the last thing that Christopher Tolkien is going to publish of all of these works. And it's similarly devised to sort of just show you how the different versions of the story evolved over time. It's more of a historical text about the author than it is like a novelized presentation of the story. So keep that in mind if you want to read those two. They're not the same. But The Children of Hurin is really well written, and it is more novelized. But if you want to continue on with that, I'm going to be doing that, and I'm going to eventually read The Hobbit and read The Lord of the Rings again. And I may be hanging around in the Discord book club channel and discussing that as time goes on. But it is, I'm telling you, it is really different to read those books again with all of this knowledge of what happened in the First and Second Age. And it really changes your perspective on things. And it's really cool to pick up on the references and understand all the songs and like know what on earth is going on.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really cool. And all those things that you might have skipped over originally on an initial read of those books, like what does this have to do with anything, will all of a sudden have tremendous relevance and context to what's going on in the story. And I don't know, it just increases the value of the other books. So I encourage that if you care to try it. If not, that's fine too. But that is the end of our book club.
It's over.
I hope you guys enjoyed it. And again, this is not necessarily a death as much as it is a hiatus. There's a possibility it could come back. We would need to have more interest in it, I think, to put the time into it.
Yeah.
But otherwise, we're going to keep focusing on videos for the channel. Have some cool stuff coming up. I'm working on a Prince of Persia video right now.
Nice.
while I work on Suikoden 2. Colin Plusa says it's all over with crying eyes, crying faces. I'm sorry, Colin.
Don't cry that it's over. Smile because it happened.
Greg says I have a great idea. Call it Video Game Club, and everyone will show up.
Yes, that is part of the problem. But yeah,
maybe we should read a Final Fantasy novel instead of.
Oh, like a fan one, or like
they have released. They have some official ones. There's a really terrible novella for like it's like Final Fantasy X-3 essentially.
Great.
But no, they're releasing a novel to finish off the Final Fantasy 15 stuff at the end of the year called Dawn of the Future. Maybe we could do that. Restless Oblivion says, I enjoyed the book club. Thanks for doing this. You're welcome. I enjoyed it as well. I learned a lot along the way. I've been really, really inspired by reading stuff, which is why I'm going to continue doing it. But now I just won't have to have an assignment where I have to read this much by next week, right? I can take it at a slower pace.
Yeah, exactly. That'll be better.
Johnny says, listen to my track, please. It's got no foul language. It's just a bit sad vibe. Let's hear it. There we go. This is good. I like this. The end of book club. This heralds the
very
end of book club. Colin says, damn it, Kason, now I'm sad that you used that.
Sorry.
It gets into a little bit of a hip-hop beat here. Bertrand says, I'm like the one guy who likes the story content more than the video game content and wants you guys to focus less on gaming. It's kind of where I'm at too, but you know,
hopefully, you know, more people will agree.
We're working on it. We're working on it slowly over time. Greg Troyan, I'm the one person. What's that? Elder Crawl says, "Have you read Dune?" I have read Dune. I didn't love Dune because people. I can't keep playing that.
I didn't hear it.
It was just distracting me is all. I'm not saying it's bad. It's just I couldn't focus on what I was saying while that was in my ear. But people compare it as like the science fiction version of like Tolkien's Middle Earth, like level kind of stuff. And I didn't feel that way about it, but I'm definitely willing to read it again. I know that they're making I think it's a series.
Yeah, I've heard.
They're working on one. And it's a pretty famous director, right? Who's helming that?
Dune series director.
Who is it?
John Harrison?
Is that? Oh, that's not it.
I'm trying to see who else is associated with it, and I'm not seeing. Oh, there's a Dune movie in 2020.
That's probably what I'm thinking of.
That's happening. That is directed by Denis Villeneuve.
Yeah. He's the guy who did...
I'm looking it up.
Fetch.
Blade Runner. Oh, he did Runner. Oh, nice.
Yes,
and he
Blade
did
Runner.
And Sicario. Did Sicario or Sicario?
Sicario, yeah.
Yeah, this
dude's a beast.
He's a beast.
He's a beast director. He's really good.
Holy
so he's doing the Doom movie that comes out in a year.
Oh, cool. Good.
So that could be cool.
Awesome.
That could be a cool time to dive back into that book before that movie comes out.
Yeah, because it says 2020, so that's next year.
Okay. Everyone's saying this is great, thank you. And then Colin Peluso, book club ends with some soulful hip hop. I wouldn't want it any other way.
Nor would I.
Anyways, guys, we appreciate you who have been part of this. It's been fun, and we'll still see you on podcasts, and we'll still see you in videos.
We'll be around.
Maybe someday I'll release my book, and then we can talk about that or something. But until then, have a great rest of your week. Peace out.
Peace.